welcome back to Rough Cut Faith. I'm Scott. This is Mike. He's the good-looking one in the group here, and we are.
Most of my face is covered
most
with
of
a
your
beard,
face is
that's
covered
why.
with a beard. I usually hide behind a coffee mug like this. You know?
Yeah.
So this is a show where we like to talk about kind of some of those maybe undeveloped thoughts regarding life and faith and how that applies to us. And it's good because it's a different context for us to flesh some things out that we wouldn't normally get to do in our role as pastors at a church where we're working through a specific book of the Bible or a specific passage. But this is kind of an opportunity for us to how does our faith actually apply to different areas?
We get the opportunity to flesh out some thoughts that, in conversation, and hope that it's helpful for other people to recognize that we don't have to have everything all figured out, and that we can still continue to work through stuff and figure things out together.
Yeah,
as part of the community.
It's the benefit of having spent a long time actually knowing each other is, we could say something dumb and the other one's not going to walk away from us forever. You've had plenty of opportunities to do that over the years, Michael.
What, say something dumb?
No, to walk away. That's why I'm so glad you've stayed.
I think we've done both.
I know. Anyway, you had an okay week this last week?
Yeah, it was fine. Had a little
little
surgery.
Little surgery.
Just a little one. just a.
All's good?
Yeah, all's fine.
Okay,
all's
good,
fine.
good.
Not going to go into any details or anything. It's fine. Fixed some things that were out of place, and now it's all good.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. I missed you this last week, actually.
I missed you too.
But it was okay.
You were away.
I was away. Yeah, you had a procedure and I left town. So we grew up going down to D.C. for the 4th of July. My dad's birthday is the 4th, and so we would go watch the fireworks down there. And so my wife went when she was 10, and so we took our daughter. Our daughter was 10. We thought she could handle it now. Yeah. So we went down and set up on the mall in front of the Washington Memorial and just kind of watched the fireworks there. Yeah. Learned several things. One was Evelyn does not like crowds. She was cool when we got there. Thought it was so cool, like, oh, look, this museum, and that's so cool, and that was in night at the museum, and and so we had a pretty cool experience on the front side, but when the fireworks ended and the masses of people all left at the same time, I learned that my daughter doesn't like crowds. So, and I was surprised because she's such an outgoing person, but that little hand was squeezing onto mine.
I think it's terrifying.
So tightly, yeah. So, but it was, we had a great time. We camped. Which was an experience because
it was hot. I imagine.
It was
like 90 here, so I know.
So DC was like 95, 97, and 90% humidity, and so the evening when we got downtown was fine, but we camped in a tent, and I don't mind that. The kids don't mind that. We'll talk a little bit about that today, but my wife doesn't camp. so she was a trooper. She didn't complain, but she had closed captioning on her face the whole time to let us know that she was not the most happy person to be there. But she slept out. It was now I have to say,
did she actually sleep?
I think so, because she didn't know that I woke up in the middle of the night because our son had to go to the bathroom. So I let him go, and when he got off of the air mattress that he and I were on, because Evelyn rolled off, I put Amy on her own air mattress so that she didn't get moved by everybody. But when he got off, I went and went all the way down, and I realized that I was like, oh, we've got a leak in our mattress, but it was that when he filled it up, I let him fill up that one. He didn't tighten the thing all the way, so it just slowly leaked over the night. So she didn't know that Kaden went to the bathroom, and she didn't know that I refilled the air mattress in the middle of the night. That was like a really slow that was an experience to do that quietly so that I didn't wake up the ladies in the tent. But the other part that was weird is that camp is in the middle of Greenbelt, Maryland. I think that was it, Greenbelt Park,
That's all like a suburb of D.C.
Yeah. So College Park, University of Maryland's all there. And this is like a national forest in the middle of the city that they put in campsites. So the Boy Scouts have a place there, and then there's other places where you can camp.
That's such a weird concept.
It was cool. It was a primitive campsite. There was no electricity, which, wasn't great for Amy because she sleeps with fan noise.
Yeah.
And it was hot, and we were in a tent, and there's no running water at the site, so you have to go to a shower, like a little shower bathhouse. And it's in the middle of the city, so the 4th of July involves fireworks all night long and other things that people like to shoot off in different cultures. So it was like, we're like sitting there listening to fireworks, and then you hear this like, pop, 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 pop. And we're like, that's not a firework. That's, tap, 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 tap. And I'm like, oh. And Evelyn's like, wait, what? I'm like, oh, people just like to shoot off all kinds of things on the 4th of July. So
you got, like, in nature?
Yeah.
Ish?
Yeah. Yeah, but you're like, right, it's like Central Park if they set up like campsites in the middle of it, you know?
Yeah.
Only smaller cities around it. But it was good to get away. We were there just that Thursday, and then we left. We had the site for 2 nights. We didn't stay the second night because it was just hot, and we had to come back and get Caden ready for camp. And so, but we stayed until like 8:30, and then we made the long trip home instead of sleeping and breaking down the next day. But that kind of brought up, we had talked actually before this, a couple of weeks back, about, I think it'd be interesting to discuss like the role or the benefits of nature for like,
it's a good segue
people
into
as
that.
a whole, but even just what does it look like for like, what does it look like for Christians to engage with nature? Is it beneficial? Because like, I live in a family where like Amy loves the outside, but she has no desire to really camp at all. She'll go for a hike all the time with us, but camping is not on her radar. But the kids and I, we love to get out. A couple of years ago, when my kids got older, like we used to just throw the tent out in places and we would camp like that. But as the kids have gotten older and started going to camps, I will take the one kid and I'll do like an individual trip with them and camping.
We talked about that last week with, you took Caden.
Yep.
And did an overnight with him.
Yeah, we did like a 14-mile hike with him and hiked in like a loop. And then, because I don't like out and backs. I want to go somewhere. So, but we did this big loop and camped in the middle of that. And then, actually, after we're done recording, I'm going to take our daughter camping so that she has an opportunity for that. And I've found, not only do I enjoy being out in nature, but I found that it's really just the context of it opens the doors for better conversations with the kids, better experiences with them, and it gives me a chance to, it's just different. You get an opportunity to hear what's going on in their hearts, and so, and build memories with them. And so for me, it's two things, like, because eventually, like with Evelyn, she goes to bed early, and then I just get a quiet night. And where we like to camp, it's near some waterfalls. That's my secret. I camp near waterfalls for the kids because they sleep with fans. So, but when she goes to bed, then I get a couple of hours to just kind of decompress, and I'll write and do and read and do different things like that.
So that fits in line with something that we were talking about. About a year ago, I read an article called The 3-Day Effect. And then you were probably around the same time, or maybe a few months later, you heard an audiobook called The 3-Day Effect. And we were talking a little bit about this similar thing, recognizing that we both interacted with the same material, the same study, but in different formats. That says 3 days in the woods, what they've found is actually makes a physiological change to your brain. It's like rewiring your brain.
It's like a reboot almost of the way things, of the way our brains work. And so the audiobook was like a 4-part podcast of somebody that was kind of going through chaos, but she ended up going into, she'd read the article from the guy that you had.
David Strayer is his name. He's from a university in Utah, but I don't remember which one.
She had seen his research and wanted to see like how people were trying to do this, and so she went on like a week-long rafting trip with a bunch of veterans that had PTSD that had gone into this experience to do research, and so they were doing like brain scans on them at the beginning of the trip and during the trip and after the trip, and just seeing what and how that exposure away from technology and in the wilderness, how it affected their actual brain waves and their mental state, their emotional state. And it was a pretty significant results to the positive that was fascinating. But then they also went and she went to another experience where it wasn't like out in the middle of nowhere, like rough and hard wilderness exposure, but it was like a luxury camp for young women that had been either abused or trafficked.
Okay.
And they took them into the wilderness to these this really posh type of wilderness experience as a way to help them decompress from the trauma they had experienced. And they discussed the similar results generally for people, that it doesn't have to be hard exposure, but just the opportunity to be out and connected in nature has a way of rewiring the brain.
And I think one important part of the study was also getting rid of technology. So it's not just being away from the busyness of a city, it's also getting rid of screens, kind of putting your phones down, not
going analog,
computer. Just encountering nature, the natural world.
Yeah, it was interesting. When we said, hey, let's talk about this, I pulled up a couple of things that I thought were really fascinating. So as far as just exposure in the wilderness, like going for walks in the woods for like 90 minutes, these are some of the things that it popped up. Like physiologically benefits, it reduces stress and lowers blood pressure. There's reduced cortisol levels, which is like some of the stress hormones, right? It lowers heart rate, blood pressure. There was an interesting thing about how it enhances your immune function. That there's certain things in the trees and some of the things that are like the trees give off actually helps to boost immune function, which was fascinating to see that. I actually wrote it down. It's the phytonicides or whatever. I don't know. Can you read that word I wrote down? I don't know. It's fascinating. It's probably rooted in Latin, but it's something that trees produce.
Phytonicides.
Yeah, it's weird. And so then it also increases some of the cells that are like the protective cells in our bloodstream. So like physiologically, it is like there's more benefits to like spending time in the woods than walking through a city. Which is a fascinating thing to think about because I never really think about the physical parts of it. I think more about the mental and the emotional and the spiritual benefits to it.
Whenever I love being in the woods because I feel better. Like it's just, okay, I can rest now. It's just trees, squirrels, birds around me. Like
and that mountain lion around me.
I'll take that over most people, really. But there's that, like you have that peace that you can't find in a city because there's other people around or cars and noise and it's always bustling. And it's not even just a city like New York or a tiny city like Scranton, but I grew up in a town of 10,000 people. And I couldn't wait to get out of town and onto a dirt path, not something that was paved. And there's this sense of peace and rest. It's like taking a deep breath that I've always associated with being in the woods, being in nature. And I grew up doing that. That was part of my family's routine or pattern of our family was like my grandfather had a cabin that was 30 minutes from our house. So often on a weekend, we'd just go to the cabin and he had 100 acres there. So we'd just spend time at the cabin, and that was always a place of rest for me. But I just thought it was because I was an introvert. I just thought I
just don't like people.
I just like being away from all the people, so I'm cool with that.
Maybe it's just that you actually felt better.
Maybe, but this research is showing, and this is what people have experienced throughout history or throughout certain times in history, they've said, I need to get away, I need to go on a retreat, I need to get into the woods, I want to do that. Now we're seeing that there's actually scientific proof that there are physiological changes happening when you leave a highly populated, developed area and get into an undeveloped space. And that, I think that's fascinating. That it's, we've all kind of felt it. Like as human beings, we all kind of, if you're not afraid to be in the woods, then you like to be in the woods.
That's why I don't watch scary movies.
Especially ones that take place in
the woods? Absolutely not. No way.
So we've all felt this, but there's now research saying, no, you're actually experiencing physical, mental, and emotional change when you're in the woods.
What's an interesting thing is I have thought about some of the emotional benefits of it in prepping for this conversation a little bit. I also know that there are plenty of folks that to go to the woods is scary as all get out, whether it's the unknown or any of that type of stuff. But there's like, I think one of the things that's been fun is on our pastoral team, I think when we started, there were 4 of us. 3 of us enjoyed that disconnected wilderness experience. And one of the guys was like very much more urban, like he could relax in the chaos of everything going on in a city. And it was, I still remember one of the early trips that we all took, and it was great for about the first
few
hours, maybe the first evening when we were all just kind of set, but the next day when it woke up and there was no cell service and there was no anything else, and it was like, I remember watching and talking with him afterwards, and he goes, I feel so disoriented about how disconnected this is.
So is that a good, like, I think, let's talk about that a little bit. That's a good example. I've talked to other people that go, I can't do a retreat in solitude. I can't do that. I can't do this silent retreat where I just let go of everything. I don't want to, that freaks me out. Is that do you think that's a different personality type, or is it a conditioning that is actually potentially damaging to us?
That's a good question, and I think it's more complicated than a simple yes or no, because everybody is different, so I don't want to make a blanket statement there. But my gut would be is that we get so used to the noise that to rip that away from us automatically, like it's almost like a withdrawal feeling. And a disorienting and I don't know what to do with myself. Like I sense that when I just sit back on a regular basis and go, okay, I'm putting my phone in the corner back in the, like when I walk in, I'm putting my phone there, and it's like the urge to pick it up, you know? Thank you, Apple, for telling me how many times I've picked up my phone today. But I think about that, like there's those moments where I'm like, man, I picked that up, like, like 100+ times today? Like what in the world is going on? And so it's almost like, so I think there's a conditioning part of it. There's a cultural norm that to remove yourself from those experiences is, unless you do it, is, unless you make it a habit to do, it is disorienting. And so I think there's a way that you can invite people into that type of, with like intentional stepping away from technology that makes wilderness experience more helpful, or at least less daunting. But to take somebody and go, okay, you have, like, your screen time is, you spend 5 hours of screen time a day or 4.5 hours of screen time a day, and now you're going to go and be in a wilderness where you're not going to have no screen time, and even if you had it, there's no cell phone service or connection, so you're literally going to be disconnected, and that would be like, what?
It is. I think when you lay it out like that, that is a terrifying prospect for some people. It's almost, I would almost liken it to when you're used to GPS. You're so used to just plugging it into your car and be like, all right, I know where to go. And then your GPS goes out. Or you're in a location where you don't have a great signal. And it's like, oh no, I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
I don't have a map. I don't know what's happening around me. I'm just on this road driving. And I think that's the type of disorientation that we can feel when we're so used to navigating life with some sort of technological help.
Sure.
And that
we don't have to think about it because of technology. Like you and I still remember road atlases, you know?
Yeah.
And so we've gone from road atlas to MapQuest printed out, right? To then like now it's like it's just on our phones. We don't even.
And it's that same, so I think it's that same emotional attachment that we have with our devices that says, if I'm stressed, I'm going to scroll through Instagram.
Sure.
If I'm bored, I'm going to watch something on YouTube. If I need to get somewhere, I need a review of this. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to read some reviews on it. So all of these different facets of our lives, the moments that we need to be filled in, we have something that fills that in for us.
Yeah.
And so to put it down and go, there's just trees around me.
Yeah.
That's very disorienting to our emotional state because we're used to that being the crutch.
Yeah.
I notice that with myself when I'm like, oh, my brain needs a break. You know, I'm working on a project or I'm doing something and I go, I need a break. I just pick up my phone and jump on TikTok for 10 minutes and watch a few videos and then go back to, or I'm like, wow, it's been 30 minutes and I need to get back to work. But that's our way of coping with certain aspects of life is to reach for a device that gives us quick hits. And then when we go into a natural space and say, I'm not going to do this, now we're depending on something else to provide that rest and peace for our minds.
Or what I think is the most challenging part is just to exist in the tension of it. That, I mean, it doesn't make it easy to go into the wilderness and not have technology around, which just seems like a slightly different conversation than we were thinking, but I think it's probably a little more applicable because it's like when you put yourself in an environment that you go like, oh, well, that's not there. Like, what do you feel? Like, and how do you pay attention to that type of stuff?
How do you process those feelings without that? Like, all of a sudden, so here's a bit of a different take, but I went through a group, I worked with a group and we were talking about solitude and silence. And my recommendation was, we had a monthly meeting and I said, this month, try to take 5 minutes a week and put everything down, quiet everything, sit in a comfortable place. I'm not asking them to go on a hike. I'm just going, go somewhere in your house that's comfortable and that's quiet for 5 minutes. And sit there quietly. Set an alarm if you have to. Sit for 5 minutes once a week. And at the end of that month, I think only a handful of them actually tried it and none of them did it weekly. And they all said, when I sat in silence, I had so many thoughts. Like, it was so overwhelming. My thoughts were, and so I couldn't do it. It was exhausting. It was scary. There was a lot of negative responses to it. It was kind of this, my task list overwhelmed me, or all of these negative thoughts about myself came. And I said, do you realize that those are always there? So what silence did for you was reveal what's always beneath the surface, and you're always distracting yourself from it. And I think that in the same way, if we were to spend time in nature without those distractions, without the crutches of technology, the disturbed nature of what we feel is the reality of how we exist.
It's actually what's beneath the surface of our life.
It's what's going on all the time that we're ignoring. And I think this, I know talking about the technology aspect of it is unique to our context now. But this is not a unique, like, we don't live in a time where this is a unique problem. If you look back at the ascetics, the Desert Fathers, these were a group from Egypt, Egyptian Christians in the first century that literally said, it's too distracting. I can't follow Christ. We can't follow Christ because the rest of the city is too distracting.
Yeah.
We're going to go out and live in the desert.
Yeah,
we have this community in the desert. And it actually became so popular that one of the early desert fathers said that the desert has become a city.
Yeah.
Because so many people were.
Yep.
And think about that.
Yeah.
That's the first century.
Yeah.
These guys were going, oh, we just can't do this. There's too many distractions. Sure. We got to get out into the wilderness.
I think it's interesting also to even just consider that Jesus withdrew to the quiet places in the wilderness for that time. Like, and that was a regular pattern that you see throughout the Gospels. So there's an element of even Christ that said the connection with the Father was so much of a priority that he withdrew from, and I would assume, like, at times, homes, other people where it would have been more convenient or more comfortable, but there was a regular pattern that said, it is important for me to step away from the chaos for that solitude.
Yeah.
And I think the role of nature in many ways, or at least the role it plays in my life, is it is a place where I can step away from the noise. And that's why I think I really, more so than just going to a campground or something like that, but even that can be just a real beautiful thing. That's why I like the hikes. I tend to, and I'm not an avid backpacker, but I enjoy it. And it's been really neat to get into a new season where I can enjoy that with my son, and hopefully, as she gets a little bit older, our daughter, to be able to do these types of trips together, because I get into it and I can have conversations with our son, but then there's a lot of times where it's just quiet, and you're just thinking about the steps in front of you. You're taking in the moments and looking at the intricacy of the plants and the animals around you and different things. And, I'm of a certain age now where birds are fascinating. So I'm like laying in bed in the hammock the one morning, and I'm like, I hear this bird, and I'm like, I have never heard that before. And so I'm like, what is that? So eventually, I figured it out because technology, right?
You can pick up your phone and find out there.
But there's those moments of sitting back and going, the wonders of creation, the intricacies of creation, give me moments of deeper gratitude, and even moments of just a sense of like how small I am. That was one of the conversations that Kate and I had this last week. Was we were sitting around the campfire, and it was starting to die down, and the stars just kept getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and we just had this conversation about how small we are, in light of all of creation. And we talked about how God's glory is revealed in what we can see above us. And that's a very different context than sitting in a service and talking about the heavens declare the glory of God, right? It's Psalm 19:1 or something like that.
To talk about it in a building in the middle of a city. While everybody came from their homes and they're all going out to dinner or going back to their homes or something. To be sitting actually under the stars and talking about it.
After a long, hard hike, and you sit there and camp food is the best. It's like, oh, this is super cheap, but man, it tastes so good right now. And but those opportunities, and then sitting by a waterfall and talking about prayer, and that there are different seasons of prayer that come in our lives, many ways, like growing up, where you talk at God, and then you talk to God, and then you that sense of you start sharing stories back and forth. You talk and you listen, and then you just be in God's presence. And I think there's different times where there's ebbs and flows where I feel like that's how I engage. Being in the wilderness for me, or being in the woods, or going on hikes, or sitting by a river, or getting away even if it's for an hour or two, those are times where it's like, I just get to be, and the experience of overwhelming emotions that show up and intrusive thoughts that show up, it's like, it's a good pulse check on where I'm at.
Yeah.
And because I think we all have coping mechanisms that are successful for us. They're just not necessarily the ones that move our heart to God.
They're not necessarily healthy either.
Yeah. And so I think that's part of the benefits of intentionally finding those quiet places. And where for me, one of those places that I look at as a safe place for me to engage in some of those deeper levels is in the woods,
so
by a lake.
We see that, we see historically
Sure.
that this has been a priority. We see it in the life of Christ.
Yeah.
That it was a priority to get away to, it was often called lonely places.
Yeah.
Or it said he went up on the mountain.
Yeah.
We see that scientifically there's actual physiological changes
Sure.
that are happening to our body and our brain
Yeah.
when we're in the wilderness.
Sure.
Why has the church not embraced this concept?
Well, so I think there's probably two things that I would say with that. One, I would look at it and go, the Western Church.
Yeah.
Because I think to love and appreciate nature is seen as you're either a hippie or a tree hugger. And so it's like, oh, like, no.
Yeah.
Like there's almost like ew, I don't want to do that. And yet, you go to the Genesis narrative and we're supposed to be stewards.
Yeah.
You know, we're caretakers of God's creation, cultivators of God's creation. But there's like this negative response to like
It's largely, it's culturally
it's
based.
a clash of values.
Yeah.
If you value nature or whatever, it's like, no, I don't, that's not who I am. I like comfort. I like air conditioning. I like this. I don't like bugs. I don't, right? But I think there's this.
There's a fear of being associated.
I think there's a cultural like stigma to it that if you really embrace it, and I think what's funny is for our church we have a pretty diverse congregation. We've got like summers are sparse because we have a pretty significant camping population here. That like that's where people go and they get away and they decompress, and so that's not necessarily what I see a lot of here. But I also like in a family where I'm at, it's like, oh yeah, no, there's different levels of comfort with it. But I don't think that means that just because you may not be comfortable like in a long-term hike, overnight camp, or you may not, you may have challenges with that. That doesn't mean that you can't benefit from intentionally pursuing moments to be outside.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've been hesitant to ascribe a spiritual nature or a spiritual element to nature because I know from my context growing up, everyone was afraid of the New Age.
Yeah. Yep.
Everyone was afraid of this concept of creation, people worshiping creation and elevating creation and saying that, oh, if we elevate creation, if we have any type of spiritual aspect to creation, then we are elevating creation above the Creator.
Yeah.
But I think that we have to remember how good creation was.
Yeah.
That chapter 1 and 2 of Genesis
Yeah.
lays out a pretty beautiful aspect of creation, and that we as humanity are formed from the dust.
Yeah.
That we are connected to the created order as well, and God called it good.
Yeah.
And so I think the church has kind of, certain elements of the church have pushed back against that because they've forgotten that there was an original good, an original innocence in creation, and God intended us to be part of that.
Yeah. It's weird in the, we look at Romans and all creation is still groaning underneath the curse of sin, right?
Yeah.
But we seem to forget that Proverbs has a lot of lessons for us that are found in nature. Like, consider the ant, consider this, consider that. It's like, oh, wow.
Psalms is
it's
filled
loaded with it, right?
The metaphor of creation is just all over the
Psalms.
Psalms.
All over the place. Yeah. So it's the Psalms, it's the Proverbs, and you look at the parables of Jesus. How many times does Jesus use nature in teaching? And so it becomes this point of, I think we just have to be willing to accept that there are that God has ordered creation in such a way that it can still speak to us about the intricacies of our God.
Yeah.
It can still speak to us about things that we just need to apply to our lives but to do that, I think we have to become observers. And not just observers of nature, but observers of ourself. And I think one of the ways that those things that exist beneath the surface that we don't necessarily pay attention to, one of those places where they can get churned up is when we step out of our routines and step out of the things that we normally use. And that's where I think, opportunities to engage in nature afford that in ways that are crazy, and I thought about that for years, and then to sit back and go, oh, science is also talking about the physiological benefits. Oh, it's talking about the mental health benefits, and it's talking about how it rewires, and lessens negative thinking cycles, and all of those things for mental health and well-being. You're like, wow, that's weird, And I know that it's not for everyone, but there's enough stuff that's there that goes maybe it should. Maybe it's probably for more of us than we think it is.
Yeah, I think of how, so my wife is part Korean, and she grew up in a lot of Korean culture.
Yeah.
Was part of her upbringing. And when her father got very sick, her father was from Texas, and so he was not a Korean national, but when he got very sick with cancer, some of the treatments they decided to pursue were in Korea.
Yeah.
And when she went over to visit him, she came back and told me how amazing the healthcare was there.
Yeah.
Because they incorporated nature into the care. So in the hospital, there was almost like an atrium with trees and flowers and plants, and they actually made it part of the treatment plan
to go and spend time there.
Spend time in this atrium where, there's other places in Korea. In this article that I read about that 3-day effect, they were talking about how it's part of the national health plan to have nature preserves and to have nature guides that are part of a medical team, so that when people are going through treatments, that they can go to these forests, and we would call them a state forest or a national park or something like that. But the country itself, the state itself, is saying we're setting these aside for medical purposes. And
that's a fascinating thought.
Oh my goodness! So it's like, this is, and that was going back to what my wife said. This is just normal healthcare. For them to say, oh yeah, we're totally connected to nature. This is so good for us, so good for patients, that we need to make this a priority. And I think that that's a huge difference between Eastern and Western thought. Eastern thought tends to be more holistic in looking at our environment around us and how that affects us as human beings. Whereas Western thought segments everything. Says, okay, well, environment doesn't do anything. You just are a person, and you can.
And we can manufacture enough medications or environments to take care of you, right?
Right. So of course, then pushing back, the Western thought pushing back against Eastern thought is we can't. That's New Age stuff. You can't trust that. You can't just go sit in the woods and expect to get better. You also need these meds. Or you just take this medication. And I think that it's interesting that we've seen this for, centuries. And then Western science is catching up to what has been innately known in Eastern thought, that you need to be surrounded by nature, that it is a natural part of who you are as a human being, who you're made to be. Cities are unnatural. They may be innocuous. It's not like sinful or bad that there's a city, but when we look at the created order, it was a garden. And it was cultivation and flourishing that we were called to.
It's fascinating as you describe that, because I think of like Revelation and the description of the New Jerusalem, that there is a garden in the middle of it.
In the middle, yep.
You know, and it's like, oh wow, and then there is creation outside of it. You know, and so there is this picture that there is a combination of the two in the hope of God's presence in the final restoration of all things. And so it's a fascinating thing to think about and to go like, maybe it's not just a personality thing. So I would think about this conversation and ask the question of like, so what does it look like for people to like engage in the outdoors in a way that is beneficial for their faith and their life, like besides just hiring a tree company to cut trees down and start shredding while we're recording, you know, it's like, hey, that sounds fine. So, but like, how does somebody look at this and go, yeah, I'm not into nature? Like, guys, that makes no sense. Like what would like, because we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about coping mechanisms of technology. We've talked about, you know, a mindset and approach to stuff. You know, we've touched on some of the benefits physiologically or mental health wise or spiritually, the picture of the lessons of creation all around throughout Scripture. Like there's so many things in and around it. And I get that some folks just, they're not drawn to that. Like, but some of us are like this fly that keeps flying around my face. We're like, oh, man, I just can't wait to get around nature again, you know? I can't wait to get outside again. So what's the, like, how do we take this conversation and even just consider...
Make it applicable.
I mean, is it...
Because some people are drawn to it, and they're, like some people listening are going to go, oh yeah, that's all, I'm all in. I want to talk to the people who aren't all in. And I think that it's like the most compelling argument is the scientific one in that regard, is the recognition that it's not because people like being in the woods. That fly is very insistent.
Listen, I attract a lot of things. They tend to be flies, but
it's not that people like to be in the woods and so it's beneficial for them. Now it's the fact that it's beneficial either way. It's kind of like vegetables, you know? I don't have to like...
It's nature. I should eat my nature.
Right. I don't like broccoli. I don't have to enjoy it in order for me to know that it's beneficial for my body to eat it. And in the same way, you don't necessarily have to be like, yes, I camp every weekend because I love being in nature so much. You don't necessarily have to enjoy it or like it or look forward to it to recognize that there is a deep physiological and psychological and emotional benefit to being in nature, to being in separated from a population and being in a place that puts you in a peaceful surrounding. Whether or not you necessarily like it, I think there's still going to be benefit to it, and it's important to recognize that for your health and well-being, make time to do that. Be intentional about it. Put forth the effort.
A lot of the stuff that's in the research that I was looking at in kind of preparation was it's not necessarily even a long time.
They said that 3 days.
Well, the 3-day effect is pretty profound.
It's very profound, but more than that isn't more profound. It's like once you hit the 3-day mark, then you just kind of coast.
They started to say that in some of the research I was looking at was like even just 90 minutes, like a 90-minute walk in the woods or in a park has physiological benefits, has psychological benefits. And so they were like, you know, it was kind of like they were just saying like, so go for a walk.
So go for a 90-minute walk.
And so like I think in that sense, those are the kinds of things that I would hope that people would go, how do I find a quiet place?
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe nature isn't your first step. Maybe it's just put your phone away for an hour.
Yeah.
And find a quiet place, and understand that if that's not a regular pattern for you, there's going to be those, like, potentially be those overwhelming thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one of the things that might be helpful is if you do that, like, take a journal with you and just jot down those thoughts. Yeah. And maybe that's something that you then can come back and address later. Like, in some ways, that's one of the things that I'm doing with, like, my counselor right now, is when I'm having certain negative thoughts or like, okay, I just got to write this down,
write it down. Yeah.
because I want to be able to talk about that,
Yeah.
And that's like maybe that's where it goes.
And I would encourage people to not do it alone.
Yeah.
Either, at least if you're not used to it. If you're used to hiking alone or being out in nature alone, then keep doing that.
Yeah.
Be intentional about it. But if you're not, if you're uncomfortable with it or you're not used to it, it's not part of your regular pattern, then get a friend.
Yeah.
Do it, like, walk together.
Yeah.
That, even a guide of some sort, like somebody maybe that you trust that does take hikes and says, oh, I can do this with you, and maybe you can help me along and figure out what it feels like to be in nature.
Well, I know you and I have done that as a way. We've taken hikes together when we've gone up to your cabin together, and part of that time often is we take a period of silence where we just kind of disappear and go out on our own. So there's been times where, like, we'll take hammocks and just disappear somewhere for a couple of hours and just spend time either in prayer or reflection, and then we come back and we talk about it.
Yeah.
There's different ways you can engage with it. I think we're not saying it's a one size fits all. We're just saying, hey, there's probably some goodies over here for you.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize, maybe this is where we can wrap up.
Sure.
I want to emphasize that this is important.
Yeah.
It's not, I think we've kind of view going out in nature as I'll do that on the 4th of July when I go to a park. Or it's something that you kind of say, when I get to it, I really enjoy it. But man, I haven't been to a state park for weeks or months.
Yeah.
It is something that we see the pattern in Scripture. We see the pattern in the early church. We see now this pattern of actual scientific study reinforcing the physiological benefits of being in nature. This is not something that really we should leave up to once or twice a year. I get to a state park. This is something that we, as people who are seeking to live our faith, to seek Christ, to be spiritual people, spiritually alive and awake and healthy, we should be making this a priority in our lives on a regular basis.
I think as you were describing that, here's the barrier in my mind that I was like, this is going to be something people have to address. We're too busy. We don't have time to go and actually do it. Like, when am I going to do that? I'm too busy.
If you're too busy for a 90-minute walk, then there are other priorities in your life that need to be addressed as well.
And I think that's probably maybe one of the first places to start, is what's going on in our life that keeps us from addressing the stuff and the noise that's always there that we just stay too busy to actually see or hear, or they're too uncomfortable with, and so we just don't want to go there. Yeah. That's good stuff.
So
I don't know that we solved anything. We just sat around and talked about I'd like to go outside.
We just talked about how much we like hiking.
It's fun.
But if you guys have any questions on this, if you want some guidance as to how to look at those priorities, how to reevaluate what's going on in your life, and how to make solitude, or at least partial solitude, with one or two trusted people out in nature, shoot us an email. We would love to talk to you about it, give any guidance. You can find us at discoverthegrove.com, and you can contact us that way. or just leave a message on the YouTube page as you watch this episode.
Or if you're in northeastern Pennsylvania and you want to take a 90-minute walk sometime, let us know.
Yeah, let us know. Scott will be happy to walk with you.
Happy to walk.
Yeah.
I'm always down for a good walk.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's so many places. Like, that's one of the great things about living in Pennsylvania. I don't know about many other states, but we have like enormous tracts of state land and state game land and state parks. It's just all over the place.
Yeah.
We're within an hour. No matter where you are in Pennsylvania, you're probably within an hour's drive of a state park.
Yeah.
So it's easy to get around and get outside.
Yep.
So I encourage you to do it. Get outside. It'll be good for your soul.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Great to see y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.